first thing that's just mostly important about customer discovery is to understand you can't do it from behind your computer screen. It's impossible. Customer discovery requires you to get out of the building and actually go search for the model you're going to pursue. So I've basically said the first step in this process is to spend time doing research, staying in front of your computer and actually finding out what you can learn. Now you have to forget all that. Once you're ready to start going through the customer discovery process, understand that you're going to have to get out of the building. And the key to good customer discovery is talking to customers. I know it seems this is really incredibly obvious, but I can't count the number of entrepreneurs when I ask them, so how many customers have you talked to? Well, when I talked to one. You can't get great at doing a startup and being evidence-based if you haven't talked to customers. Fundamentally, one of the problems that we found in my company before this, Zarly, is that we came with an idea that we thought people would use, and we validated with our friends, but we had to change models entirely because we hadn't done enough customer discovery. It's important to make sure that you know that you do customer discovery, and part of the homework that I'm going to give you all is once you're past the idea generation phase, is for the next few weeks before our next class, is you should be talking to 10 to 15 potential customers and industry players per week. I know it seems like a lot, but ultimately you'll learn so much by doing those customer interviews, and you're going to get a lot out of it. So I'm not going to spend too much time talking generally about the customer discovery process. Part of your homework actually is to watch the free lectures by Steve Blank. He's actually the man who's put all the research and work into how to do customer discovery. There's a free program called How to Build a Startup, the Lean Launchpad, on Udacity. Won't take you tons of time, and it's very well structured, it's very well done. Spend time going through it, particularly before the next class. Watch the first half of the videos before it really gets too far into actually customer development. But it's important to understand a lot. So watch this program. I'm not going to spend too much time in this one talking about specifics of customer discovery, kind of the background, but what I am going to spend time on is actually the hardest part of customer discovery, is actually doing great customer interviews. So this is a little bit of a section on the how-to about customer interviews. Who here at their job has done customer interviews before? Raise your hand. Yeah. What did you find hard about it?
The hard thing about customer interviews is when they have something negative to say about your product.
Yeah, that's a great one. Ultimately, the truth is hard to hear sometimes. What else is hard about customer interviews?
Not giving too much away, but also enough that you get some sort of real feedback.
Yeah, it's very hard to sometimes know how you actually can not lead them too far by giving them too much information to say, so I'm here because I want to tell you about this amazing product I have, and then by that point you've kind of already lost it. So we're going to talk a lot about how to be more effective when you actually do customer interviews. And I've probably done 1,000 customer interviews over the course of my startups now, more. I've done 300 plus for just this startup that I'm currently working on. So I've been terrible at it, and it's easy to be terrible at, but set yourself a goal and you'll get much better at it, and I'll give you a structure to actually make these much more effective. So again, my rule of threes here, I try and put everything in rules of threes to make it pretty simple. So I actually think that customer discovery, doing a good customer interview, comes down to three things. PPS, person, problem, solution. These are the key things if you remember nothing about customer discovery, is when you do an interview, think in PPS. When you first start having a conversation with someone, when you actually want to be engaged and understand who they are. So the worst thing to do is start to say, let me tell you all this stuff that I want to tell you. The better thing to do is like, so tell me about yourself. What do you do? What's your background? From there you'll build up a base, the foundation of this interview, where you'll actually be able to talk about what are their problems. And then eventually at the end, you'll be able to talk about the solutions. But you'll find if you try to build this process from the roof down, it doesn't stand up very well. So this is why PPS is really important. So let me talk about what that actually means, how you apply this when you're doing interviews. And we'll talk about how to find these interview candidates a little bit more too. So really the first step in all of this that usually winds up taking at least the first 25 to 50% of the interview is actually learning about the person. Who are they? What do they do? What's their role? Who's their boss? How do they get there? What's a typical day like for them? Just understand actually what makes them tick. Because ultimately you're going to find out a lot of things that they might not necessarily have publicly said unless you ask a lot of questions. So who here has ever seen the movie 40-Year-Old Virgin? Seen the movie? You know, there's a part in there where he says, how do I speak to women? And the answer is just ask questions. And so this is the same in customer interviews. Just ask questions. Don't try and tell them too much. If they say, tell me about your product, tell me about your product. You can ultimately play these back and use a lot of questions. The whole goal of this first section of customer discovery is to get a baseline background and build a relationship. Again, a lot of customer discovery is like effective dating. The last thing that you want is someone telling that someone blasting you with all kinds of information. So get them to start talking to you, and you wind up having a good baseline to start from. So once you've actually established that relationship, we're going to then start to transition into the problem. So again, you've already identified through your idea generation phase, what's the problem that you want to solve? So what you're actually trying to understand is, does this problem really exist for someone? You don't want to solve a problem that someone says is sort of a problem or not really a problem. A good example of this is foreign language learning. And so this is my classic example. Who here wants to learn a foreign language? Raise your hand. So I'd say about 2/3 of the room or so wants to learn a foreign language here. So that means if I just played it out right here, it means that 2/3 of all people in this cohort want to learn a foreign language. So therefore, that's a big market of people who want to learn a foreign language. Turns out that's not actually the right question to ask. So the better question to ask is, who here has actually paid for some kind of language learning program before? Raise your hand. Much less. So we see there about 40% of the room actually said that they've paid for it. So the reality is, it's an aspirational problem for someone rather than a real problem. And that's one of the things that's important to understand is, you're actually trying to get them to tell you, to offer what the problem is, as opposed to you say, as I said, who here wants to learn a foreign language? Everyone said it's a problem. And if I just stopped there, I'd be done. You want them to volunteer what the problems are. And this is why this process will help. So before you tell them what you're working on, you're going to tell them things like, what are the key challenges in your job? What are the problems you face? One of my favorite ones to do is, if I had a magical box that I could put on your desk right now, and it could do anything to make your life easier at work or at home, what would this box do? That's one of the things that's important to do, is find out if they've actually got a problem. And the second part of this is, if they identify that there's a problem, ask them, so what are you doing to solve it right now? And that's kind of the trick here, where I actually went back to say, who here actually is paying for foreign language lessons to get better at it? Same thing, who here wants to get in better shape? Raise your hand. Raise your hand if you have a personal trainer. One person out of the room still has a personal trainer. So again, it just points out to know that, again, don't just assume that because you lead them to a problem, that they're going to give you that it's a real problem. Instead, this better asking the question is, understand, is this a problem for you to get a personal trainer? So again, the goal of this process, which will probably take about half of the time, the other half of the time, is to get them to say the problem that they want solved. It's ideal if they offer it without your prompting. Now you can ultimately do what I did a little bit, which is understand who here has paid for a personal trainer, which is helpful, but more I would want Jeff to actually volunteer to me. The biggest problem in my life is I can't get in shape. So you want people to actually give you, sorry Jeff, you know it's not really a problem.
I'm missing my session right now.
Yeah, sorry. So what you're ultimately trying to do is get them to tell you it's a problem. Because no one wants to be sold a problem that they don't really have. It's the classic problem for entrepreneurs, is you try and solve a problem that you think the customer has, rather than the problem that they actually tell you they have. So again, the goal here of the problem time is to really get them to focus on what the problems that they have are. And then finally, the last part of it, and this is usually a very small portion of it, is what I call the great reveal. You're ultimately might suggest a solution you have. So again, take an idea all the way through. And what's happened here is, we've gone and heard the problems. If someone says they've got a problem with, they want to get in better shape, you might then at the end be able to say, well, what if I could give you a personal trainer app on your phone? Would this be interesting to you? If they tell you, yeah, that's pretty interesting, that's the kiss of death right there. What you want them to do is try and grab that thing out of your hand. Like, yes, I would love a personal trainer app on my phone, or whatever it might be. I'd love someone to tutor me in Spanish, whatever it might be. You're ultimately going to be looking for people who are interested in that, having that solution to the problem they really have. Now, you might not always get this, and don't worry if someone doesn't get super excited about your initial solution. You're going to run through a lot of them. But really what you're doing is looking for, how do they react to what kind of solution you're proposing. The key in all of this process here, and revealing some type of a solution, is saying, are they interested generally in the solution you're proposing, and can you get some feedback and maybe go back to them for more. So this is the key to the PPS. Now I've got a whole bunch of notes on how to do great interviewing here. I promise I'll post them and share them for all of you guys, but there's a whole bunch of things that are important when you're actually doing great interviews, is if you can, take great notes, and even better, record them. Record it. There's an easy way on your if you have an iPhone or an Android, to record it. As you go back through it, you might pick up some interesting notes. If you do have another person you're doing this with, try and bring a second person to these interviews, because they'll wind up taking notes maybe and hearing some things that you would miss when you're thinking about the next question. If you prepare a script, which I'll talk about a little bit, go off it. understand that this is more of a conversation than a dialogue. This is not a focus group. So just to be totally clear, you're not holding a focus group where you're basically like checking things off a box. You're trying to just gather information. This is the first part of customer discovery where you're trying to discover. You're not trying to validate yet, for sure. You're trying to discover. So again, always end these conversations, number 9 is the important one, with an ask. So one of the things I always like to encourage people to do is say, hey, do you know anyone else who might be helpful to teach me about this space? Or do you know someone else I should talk to for some ideas here? Always end with an ask if you can, or hey, can I come back? And sometimes this process works really well. There was a team actually out of Stanford that decided to go through the same process to actually create non-beef jerky. So they wanted to create a new flavor of jerky products. And so Steve Blank actually sent them to go to interview someone at Whole Foods. And so they kind of brought them through this idea, saw what the topic was, if they were interested in alternative jerky products like fish jerky and turkey jerky. And so at the end, they literally asked, would you be interested in buying it if we could create it? They walked home with a $50,000 purchase order on the spot from asking. So understand that when you're actually meeting with these people, if you see they've got the problem and they're intrigued by your solution, ask them for the sale. So the other question that I oftentimes get is, where do you find people to interview? If you're doing customer interviews here and you know you want to learn more about the process, there's a lot of places you can find online. I usually encourage people to say, expect about a 10 to 20% response rate from places like Meetup or Facebook or social media groups. It's meaning you have to set a big N to find enough people who are going to come through it. So just understand it may take a lot of fishing to find people in there. The other one is ultimately go out to the people that you know. Talk to your friends, talk to your family, talk to your coworkers, talk to your classmates. When you do that, I find on average there's a 30 to 40% response rate. So if you ask someone directly, hey, can I interview you, your mom's a doctor or whatever that is, you'll see a really high response rate on that. And just understand that's really helpful. So again, if you can focus on having them tell you about their problem, you'll get much better at the solution. So don't try and sell at these early meetings. Try and focus on learning, and that's where the key thing is. The key other point here is, remember, you're in the business of helping and helping to learn rather than selling. So don't try to push anything at this early stage when you're trying to learn. So now, kind of what do you do with this? Like, what's the homework out of this here for you? So there's actually kind of 3 parts that you're going to be going through when you do your customer interviews here. The first one is just doing interviews. You're looking to do 8 to 10 kind of per customer type. So if you decide that you want to go after cardiologists, let's say, or you want to go after new moms, you want to try to find 8 to 10 of those types of people to really do this initial interview. Now, not everyone has a team member to go through this with, but find someone to go with you if you can, and if you can't, record it, because you're going to want to go back through so you can get those notes there. And remember, try and take as detailed notes as possible. There's gold in a lot of these things that you may not have realized if you're not really paying attention. The second step in this is make sure that you review what you heard. There's a lot of things that go on in there. Don't just take the interview and understand like, oh, it was great, and forget about it. But actually go back and review your notes again. Put them aside for the night and come back a couple days later. Review the transcript again. And ultimately look for patterns. One of the things that's really important when you do 8 to 12 interviews is you're going to hear things that might come up a couple times. And those patterns are things that you should circle, because if you hear something a couple times, you know you might be onto something. And the last thing that's important is, as you're going through interviews, evolve. Don't wind up pushing the same kind of approach if you hear something that's interesting. So if someone in your first 2 interviews, if you're interviewing new moms, and someone says they're really actually less interested in baby clothing and more interested in strollers, well, you should make sure that you talk about strollers in the next interview just to see if that holds true. As you start to go do your customer interviews here, there's a couple of things to think about. Once you start to put together your list of people that you're going to go try and talk to, again, I encourage you throughout this course, once you've basically settled on your idea to run through, you're going to need to do 10 to 15 per week. And I know it seems like a lot, but it's ultimately totally doable, and you can get through a lot of people quickly. But put together some kind of a high-level script. Focus on the same thing, which is person, problem, solution. You're going to be asking them general questions about, so where'd you go to school? What'd you major in? Are you married? Are you not married? All those type of things to learn about the person. Don't intro with, I'm doing a startup. It's much easier to say, I'm doing research, I'm a student, I'm thinking about something, someone said you're an expert, I'd love to learn a little more, I might be writing an article. All of those kind of things that are mostly true are good ways to actually get started on the interview. Start as broad as possible and kind of continue to work down and get more and more narrow. Kind of an MVP house. Start with the broad about the person and get narrow. ultimately the goal is to create a list of 8 to 10 people in those interviews. I encourage you to try and bang out 4 in a day. It's ultimately hard if you kind of do 1 each day, but see if you can get through 4 in a day because you ultimately get in the rhythm of it. So block up a couple hours and see if you can do them. In person is ideal. So first ranking is try and do all these interviews in person. Second is video Skype. Third is phone, and fourth is a survey. If you can try and make sure for your initial people you're talking to, you get them face to face. And do it. Ultimately is the last thing. Is this seems like a lot, but ultimately I've done more than 300 interviews for this current company, and I've basically changed course after all of them. Like they always help you get better and better, and they always feel like, God, I don't want to get up on Saturday and go talk to a bunch of people. But you find out if you just go to the mall and stand outside and you find your target customer and just go talk to them, people love talking about themselves, and it's actually quite interesting to see the people you meet. So just get out of the building and try. That's the key to customer discovery. So I do have a few kind of homework pieces for you. Now, I'm not checking whether you do homework or not, but I will ask a couple of you next class to actually come up and spend some time up in front walking through some of these things. So what I would urge all of you to do is run the ideation process to select your idea. If you already have an idea, I still encourage you to kind of run it through this process. The second piece of homework is watch the Steve Blank startup lectures. You're going to find that there's nuggets of gold in there, and you'll just learn a lot more about the process. Once you've selected your idea and started to go through the customer discovery process, try and do 10 to 15 per week, and you'll learn about the business model canvas. We're not going to focus exclusively in this lecture series on the business model canvas, but it's going to be an important tool for you all to understand how it works. You'll get all of that information from how to start a startup, and again, I'm not checking on you. I'm not going to basically say, like, you only did 9 interviews today, but ultimately I am going to give you a way, if you want someone to help you, is that at the end of this we're going to spend some time. If someone wants a buddy, the buddy system works great in this, so I'm going to pair you up. If you're interested, if people want a buddy through this, pair you up with someone you don't know, and urge you guys to do a once-a-week phone call with each other to see how you're doing on progressing through it. Turns out entrepreneurship is a full contact sport. You need people to help you and push you and make you better. Next session of this will be held October 22nd. With that, that's my information. Feel free to ping me if people have questions. I'm here as a professor in EIR, but at heart I'm a startup guy, so understand that I want to be as helpful as possible for you guys doing your startups, but I can't do your startup for you, and I can't help you necessarily do the interviews and spend time on the ideation, but I want you to be successful. So to the extent I can help you, come to office hours, set up time with me. I'd love to do it. I'll set up more office hours if there's more time needed. But hopefully by the end of this process, you'll see that by the next class, you're going to have an idea, and you're going to actually talk to people about it. So I think you'll be moving along the course. The next course, we're going to actually start to do things like how you actually select what to call your company, how you actually select kind of what would the logo look like. The next class, we're going to do our first round of MVPs, and then we're going to actually try and build more and more things. So over the course of this, by the end of it, you'll have some tools of the trade to do it. Any questions on customer discovery, the process, program? Anyone like, this is terrible? No? It's terrible?
Yeah, bad timing. I get asked a lot, what happens if during the customer discovery process, people want to steal your idea? That's a big
if someone wants
question.
if someone wants to steal your idea, they're gonna have to do an awful lot of work to turn it into a real company. So I think the reality of it is people will always talk about ideas and yes, I'm in startups, but you're gonna win based on how great you execute. So basically, I'll tell a story. So the last company I started, Zarly, we've raised tens of millions of dollars and sold millions and millions of products on our system and services. When I started the company, within the first 6 months of starting it, no less than 200 people, I swear, 200 people came up to me and said, I had the idea for Zarly way before you guys did. And I was like, yeah, and I have a company. So the difference there is that people will have lots of ideas and think they're valuable. The reality is this process isn't about picking the best idea. It's about picking the best idea to execute on. So understand that ideas are a dime a dozen. A lot of people will say Facebook, people had many ideas for Facebook, but Mark Zuckerberg did a better job executing on that idea. So, God, great if someone wants to steal your idea. Ultimately, you'll just show them how good you are, and it'll make you run faster.
When you're doing the interviews, do you tell people they're going to be taped or that you're going to be taking notes?
I don't usually tell them, I usually make it obvious that I'm taking notes, but I do ask them, do you mind if I just record this so that I can wind up going back on it? And I've actually never had anyone say no, so I find it to be pretty easy that most people are like, oh yeah, sure. The other trick that I found in doing great customer discovery, and you can use it however it is, you're taking a class right now, so say, I'm researching you for a class I'm taking. So it's a good way to basically break the ice. Use the fact you're a student, use the fact you're involved in university. People lower their barriers a lot when they know that it's initial research. And again, it is for a class. It's just also we hope that the startup for you guys comes out of this class. But it does make it a lot easier and lower barriers right there. But I would encourage you to find someone, and I know it seems crazy, and this is a little bit like we've arranged for a speed dating night or something like that. I'm not asking you guys to do anything other than have one 15-minute phone call a week. That's all. Just literally to check in how things are going. And it's just a simple way to know that you've got to prepare for that call that you're going to have. It's really funny how it works, but if you literally just schedule a call, and so pick Fridays at 2:30 that you're going to have your call with the other person, and just say, like, how's it going? And if you can say, yeah, I got really busy and I couldn't do my interviews, like, you just feel bad, right? Like, you just do. So I always set up a schedule, and I set up meetings for when I'm going to have those things. So I'll leave it up to you guys to find buddies and partner up.
Wait, so this is just a check-in with each other, you're not like doing this?
No. It's, all it is someone to check in who's going to be going through a similar process. So part of this thing is you all are going through this process at the same time. So you should be essentially going through this. So kind of this next week, you should start doing this ideation process. And you can even bring the other person to your brainstorming session if you want, but you don't have to. It's a good way just to have someone make sure you're going on with it, because I'll tell a story a little bit about this Steve Blank's Udacity lecture. So the Udacity lecture essentially shows kind of the process to go through of starting a startup. And it's maybe about 4 hours long of lectures. It's terrific though. The reality is 75,000 people signed up for this course in the first 3 days that he offered it. 75,000. And we want to take a guess about how many people finished that over the next 4 months of those 75,000. Any guesses? A little more than that, but close. 2,000 people. So 2,000 people, a little less than 5%, under 5%, finished the class. So the reality is, though, is I've taught this same class with entrepreneurs, and 100% of the students that did it with this class, with peer pressure and all the like, finished it. So part of the trick here, and why I encourage people to find a buddy who they don't know, is that you wind up having someone to push you.